Okay, thank you, and sorry the video didn't work, but you'll get it this way, probably even better. Yeah, this talk is called the integration of the complementary therapies of energy psychology and Dreamwork. We call it the Dream to Freedom method. My wife and I developed it. I was trained in Gestalt therapy, style Dreamwork, and many others, but we used Gestalt work in this particular activity. And my wife was a clinician and was trained in what's called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. More information can be found on the website, or if you need to get hold of me, the dreamscience.org site. This was recently, what I'm going to give you is a summary of what was recently published in a couple of different journals. They're both integrative and complementary medicine journals. And if there is more interest in this approach, there's a couple of handbooks that it's appeared in a number of books, but these are the two main ones. Dream to Freedom, which is a handbook for integrating Dreamwork and energy psychology. It includes the 7 case studies that I'll be discussing here. Also, the clinical EFT handbook has the same approach in it and also discusses the standardized approach used for EFT in this process. So let me cover the theoretical basis first. The approach follows the principle of what's known as emotional memory reconsolidation, and particularly the transformational sequence that Bruce Ecker wrote about. That sequence goes somewhat like this. If we reactivate a stressful memory and its stress response that comes along with it, the neural circuits involved remain labile or somewhat elastic for anywhere from 3 to 5 hours, depending on the study. And this means that they're subject to change. And if we create a scenario contradictory to the old learning, the old stress response, and juxtapose the two in a relearning experience, which is usually therapy or some other approach, which is what we're going to show you here, then the old memory will reconsolidate with the new learning. And it's actually the emotional memory that does the reconsolidation. It doesn't change the actual episodic memory. So the way we interleaved Dream to Freedom into this is the first phase, or part one of it, was applying Dreamwork in order to recall or reactivate the emotional memory and the stress response that goes along with it. This is the work we used, or I used, was a Gestalt-derived scripted role play. I scripted it because I wanted to be somewhat standardized so it could get similar results each time. Part two was, in order to create a scenario contradictory to the old learning, this is where emotional freedom technique came in, EFT. By stimulating acupuncture points or tapping on them, it's been found in various studies to dampen the arousal in various areas of the brain, which creates a calming sensation that contradicts the stressful reaction that the person got from recalling the original incident and the stress. So what happens is the old memory reconsolidates with a new learning, and it comes out basically as the emotional reaction to the memory is calm versus stress. And so what we do at that point in time, once the stress has been reduced, I like to go back to the dream and explore any action-related insights from the dream, because the dream itself is a problem-solving machine. And sometimes it has hints and tips or attempts at reducing the problem, the emotional reaction, and the problem that the dreamer and the Dreamwork is dealing with. So in the actually book that I referenced, the Dream Freedom book, we put 7 different case studies in there. These case studies are really just observations, but we use a standardized approach so that they, we would have some similarity with the technique used and the results received. Now, the symptoms varied in nature, from anxiety to fear to guilt to conflict. And in one case, a person who had daily migraines that had really ended the person's career. And of the 7 cases, 3 were extremely debilitating. They affected the person's daily life. So there was anything from severe to basically normal stresses of daily life that we looked at. In the 7 cases, the role play Dreamwork actually did surface the related stressful memory and the response. The distress, we rated it with it's a self-rated on a 0 to 10 SUD scale, self units of distress. It was rated anywhere from 7 to, in one case, 12 in these case studies. And I'm going to show you the case study that was rated 12. The EFT tapping in all cases reduced the stress level down to a 0 or 1 from these levels of 7 to 12 within about 3 to 6 rounds. And I'll define what a round means here in a minute. 4 of the cases had a new memory arise, which increases stress. So sometimes what happens is you take the stress level down from the original memory, some new memory will arise that increases it, and you just tap on that new memory, and we were able to reduce it in 1 to 2 rounds in each case. The closure protocol, going back to the dream, to look for action steps, resulted in defining a specific practical action step in every case. All the dreams appeared to introduce an apparent resolution scenario. 2 of them, the dreams did a little plot twist. In 2, the dreams forced a decision point. And 3, there was some sort of guiding word. Sometimes it was from the dreamer themselves. These are all metaphors, so they're not literal in any case. 3 produced some sort of influencing example. The dream was producing examples to test out various scenarios, and that's kind of the way the dream works in this case. The results were achieved also in all 7 in about a 1.5 hour session, 2 in one case, the 3-hour session for the person who had migraines. And 4 of these cases had follow-up actions, which we later checked on. And all the follow-up actions have created immediate resolutions to the stated problem when they came into the sessions. When we checked on the person with migraines, like I say, her career was completely destroyed. She could no longer work. She was a very successful businesswoman, couldn't even hold a relationship. And there was no recurrence of the migraines after 1.5 years. So the results of this approach seem to be pretty effective. So let me give you a case example. It'll show you how this all works. The person, I'll call her Karen. She was in a loving relationship with her boyfriend, Jim, a new boyfriend, who was having an operation. She wanted to be nurturing and strong and there for Jim, but an unidentifiable, she couldn't figure out why she was feeling this way. This anxiety grew inside her, intense, every time she thought about helping him out with this through this operation. And it was so intense that at that point, she had decided to break off the relationship, and she was going to do it that day. Well, she happened to enter our workshop and shared the following dream. She said, "I'm in a home I shared with my ex-husband, looking out over trees that contain black things. My mother is there, and we are trying to decide whether they are birds or bats." She said she wrote with great anxiety. She considered it a nightmare. It seemed like a very simple dream, but you'll see it had a lot of content. Now, the first part of our approach is we try to answer the question, what emotional situation is the person in their dream dealing with? And this is based on the theory that a dream image pictures the emotions of the dreamer. Now, a couple of folks, Ernest Hartman and Fritz Perls, both taught that, and it seems to be the case, as you'll see. So what I did is I guided her to re-enter the dream. It's a little breathing exercise to re-enter the dream and go back to a part of it that's the most emotional point. And I asked her to pick something out in the dream image, to visualize the dream that drew her attention. And she said, a lone bird's nest. Now, notice that wasn't reported in the original dream narrative, but once she went into the dream, it stood out and drew her attention. So then I asked her to, okay, this is part of Gestalt work. I asked her to become the lone bird's nest and have the bird's nest express its feelings in answering a series of questions. And I standardized the questions, and it kind of went this way. I said, "What are you?" And she said, "I'm a lone bird's nest." I said, "What is your purpose?" "It's the soft landing spot." I said, "What do you like about being a lone bird's nest?" "I like that I can be soft and warm." I said, "What do you dislike about being a lone bird's nest?" She said, "I dislike being crapped on." So you can see something's going on here, a little switch. "What do you fear the most?" "I fear being blown out of the tree." "And what do you desire?" She says, "I will be there and be strong." So notice there's something going on here. What, in theory, what this is doing is it's moving the conscious mind, the ego, et cetera, off into a game of playing a bird's nest. And it allows the unconscious to kind of speak through the bird's nest or through the image in the process. And so we see something strange going on here. She says, "I like being soft and warm, being a soft landing spot, et cetera," taking care of her friend, in other words. But I dislike being crapped out on and blown out of the tree. So I said, does this sound like something you have felt in waking life? Now we're looking at these statements not coming from a bird's nest, but coming from the actual person themselves. So does this sound like something you felt in waking life? She says, "Oh, yes. The moment as I decided to divorce my ex-husband, I went all out to help him. They were building a house together. And he arrived 2 hours late and started yelling at me for not doing enough. And at that moment, she turned around and basically said, 'Let's get a divorce.'" So what's happening here is this part of the emotional freedom technique, the emotional memory, it becomes deconsolidated and in theory labile. So we can, in theory, work with these emotions and the feelings that came with them. So the second part of the approach is to apply EFT. Okay, the first thing we do is check the stress level, and the best tool we have is it's called SUDS. It's visualizing the memory and self-rating the level of stress the person feels from a 1 to a 10. In this particular case, she says it's a 12. So that was a pretty severe memory that Dream brought up, and emotions that went along and the reaction that went along with it. So then what we do is we create an affirmation statement. It goes something like this: "Even though I feel," and you plug in the negative feelings, "I choose to," whatever your positive intention is in this situation. Her affirmation was, "Even though I feel taken for granted, I choose to be there and be strong." And at that point, what we do is say that statement at least 3 times. There's nothing strict about this, but and tap on this TH3 point. Some of it people call it the karate chop point, and say this wall tapping on that particular point. And also come up with a reminder phrase, because we're going to do a lot of tapping, so we need something short. And while we do that, so she said, well, her reminder phrase was "feel taken for granted." So then we start the tapping rounds, and what a round is you visualize the scene. You need to use the reminder phrase to keep the scene visualized of the original trauma, and tap on these 8 points that are those blue things that are shown flashing here, and about 10 times. And you can tap with usually both fingers, or both fingers on both hands, and about 10 taps, and then we do that twice, and that is, we consider it a round, or our standardized round. Then at that end of each round, we check the subject units of distress, and then continue the rounds until the person says their stress level has dropped to round 1 or 0. In this case, after 2 rounds, the stress level decreased to about 7. It went from 12 to 7. But all of a sudden, on the 3rd round, it started to increase slightly. And I asked, well, did a new memory come up? And she says, yes, I suddenly feel guilty at having left him. So we look at that in terms of tapping on that particular memory now with a new affirmation, which came up with this, even though I feel guilty, I choose to be there and be strong. And her little reminder phrase was feel guilty. And we continued the tapping rounds until the stress reduced to 1 or 0. And it took a couple rounds, but this is interesting. We said she got a strange smile on her face, which is common when all of a sudden this stress goes away. She says, I said, what are you thinking? She says, I can recall the memory perfectly, but it feels almost silly now. So notice this is what happens with emotional memory reconsolidation. It did not change or reconsolidate the episodic memory. It only deals with the emotional memory. So then what we'd like to do is once the memory has and the stress once the stress response from the memory is reduced, it's sometimes good to return to the dream and see if there was any clues in the dream that showed how the unconscious mind was trying to resolve the situation. There is a threat scenario theory about dreaming where the dream is placing threat scenarios in front of the dreamer and trying to deal with ways of reducing the stress. And so we looked in, we want to take a look at the dream and ask the question, did the dream attempt a resolution? And I've in the thousands of cases I've studied, I've kind of bundled these resolution attempts, these threat scenarios, into 5 different clues. One of them is guiding action or words. Didn't seem to be any of that here. Another one is surprise. The dream will have a little twist, an anomaly, a new discovery, something to show you a different way of looking at things. Didn't see that here. Another thing, the dream will sometimes force a decision or a reversal where the person actually reverses their action in the dream. Or sometimes it'll force mastery where the person will stand up and face their fears, things of that sort. But we did see a decision. The actual dream itself was ending with pressure to choose birds or bats. That's a metaphor, which we don't quite understand yet, but that was the decision being made or attempted. And the other thing, though, sometimes dreams will place an exemplary person or event and to show a different way of approaching the thing. Sometimes they'll use a person from your past to show you, how would Joe do this? How would they deal with this situation? And this dream had it in there. Exemplary person was her mother. And I said, well, what are some of the characteristics of your mother? Oh, she's a very nurturing person. So here was a nurturing influence that the dream inserted. And lastly, reinforcement. Sometimes when the expected action takes place in the dream will reinforce that particular action. That did not appear here. But we had 2 things that looked like the dream was attempting to resolve the situation. But it was very unclear. And if it is unclear, or if the dream remains unresolved, as it seemed to be in this particular case, I like to use an approach that Jung developed called active imagination, where we re-enter the dream at the very ending, and finish the dream in a positive way. And doing it by just letting the images flow. You can't think through it, or you get the ego involved. So in this particular case, I asked her to go back into the dream, feel what she's feeling, what she was attempting to do, etc. And just let the images flow. And then what the image that came to her was, I fly away with the bats. And so, of course, in my limited view of birds and bats, I felt that somehow there was something negative about the bats. But so I asked her, how are bats different than birds? And what she said was, bats, like birds, are free, but unlike birds, they are helpful and come home at night. Come home to the nest at night. And so we from that, we get a little metaphor. We get a better understanding what birds and bats were to her. And also we get a metaphor that might apply to a waking life, a way of looking things, a waking life action. So I asked her to define the insight as a waking life solution. And she says, yeah, I can be like a bat. I can be there for my new boyfriend, be helpful, and still be me. And I said, well, let's check that out. Is that practical, appropriate, healthy, or does it leave you stuck again? Which is important to do before you follow the advice that a metaphor gave you in a dream. And she said, yeah, sure, I could do that. And then it sounds very healthy. She said, oh, if okay, and then let's determine what your next steps will be. And she says, I will tell my boyfriend today that I have decided to stay with him. And then the most amazing thing happened at that point. He happened to actually be there at the conference, and he walked in the door of the workshop, and she went up to him and hugged him and kissed him. Of course, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, and he was kind of astounded with what was going on. But so that's the approach. And I'm now open to any questions. And if you want to get hold of me, dreamscience.org is an appropriate place to do so. Okay, I think I'm somewhere on the video here. Okay.